the study of the form itself has not been studied by anybody.
Okay.
So I'm doing things that...
He is the only human being.
If we allow the natural development and push, stress of our technologies to continue, there will be no visual area left in the world in, say, 10 years. There will be no civilization of any kind whatever in 10 years. No, it's up to us. We're doing this to ourselves. No one's doing this to us.
I thought there was lightning in my house.
We would practically live in a world of ESP.
We're in a position of being able to program the environment as a teaching machine. War is the use of the total environment as a teaching machine.
When your whole sensorium is in action.
The classroom uses just one little bit
That ever studied the effects of literacy on the people who were literate.
But we now live electrically.
Or the effects of anything on anybody.
Electrically.
Now, this, as I say, is a unique
In a non-Euclidean way.
thing in Innes's case. Aristotle and Plato never studied the effects of anything on anybody.
Without a public, there is no game.
No, okay, I'm not...
I'm perfectly capable of moralizing.
I'm not
The
wanting to
speed
take
of
over
light
the
is not a fraction the speed of thought.
I had made
Stuff that went on in the 60s. I think it was at the same time that this conference was going on that we all met. Newsweek magazine wanted to do a cover on Marshall. So they invited him to the high church lunch on the top floor and all that kind of stuff. And all the guys, the heads of the departments came in, and he had to do his, dog and pony show and things like that. I was there.
This is what Harold Innes taught you all about this. You guys never read Harold Innes.
You won't read this in any book except Understanding Media.
First, could you tell me about the title of your book and not for publication? I mean, I wouldn't, but just so we have it on tape.
This book that Ralph Baldwin and I are writing is tentatively titled A Message for the Fish.
Visual man can suppress nearly all the meanings of a word.
The dyslexia problem.
Highly literate person is offended when you pun using some other meaning of a word.
Trampolines.
He groans merely to hear the acoustic dimension of a word put into play. Young and easily frightened.
And it relates to this very matter we were talking about, because we have another friend, Father Culkin, S.J., up at Fordham, who is in the habit of saying, we don't know who, getting him on the trampoline, discovered water, but we know it wasn't a fish. And this led us in turn to say, we are writing a message for the fish, that is, a message for those who are blinded or blocked in their perceptions.
In other words, we're blinded by our own knowledge. What prevents us from penetrating the world of ignorance is our knowledge.
Yeah.
We turn the light into our face and say, I cannot see a thing. Now, if you turn the light around, you can do it with the mass media. That's my whole point, that with the instantaneous media, you don't have to shine this light in your face anymore. You can use the ignorance of millions of people to solve the problem instead of using your knowledge, use their ignorance.
Blocked in their perceptions by their environments. And we think it's a rather useful title. It has a certain flip quality that may annoy some, but it's basically descriptive of what we're doing.
Now the point is this, that all the great discoveries in the world are made by ignorant people. Which one's that?
That's the Empedocles.
All the introduction to Empedocles is a new edition of Empedocles. And there's some good points in this essay.
Okay.
All the great discoveries in the world have been made by ignorant people.
Well,
I mean the big discoveries, not there are some little ones in our time, but the very few discoveries are ever made when people are looking for it.
And, casting his pearls before swings. This is a phrase out of Finnegan, and it's typical of the technique of Finnegan. Joyce regarded the human language as the biggest storage system of human knowledge and perception anywhere.
And his own use of that vast store of human perception was to retrieve from it in a pattern which made discovery natural.
Though he might have been more humble, there's no police like Holmes.
Though he might have been more humble, there's no police like Holmes.
This is a very weird, I think perhaps this is where the atom bomb brought people into a paradox.
James Joyce, I'm quoting him, from Finnegan's Wake. Now, though he might have been more humble,
after the
West shall shake the East awake,
while yet you have the night for morn.
suggesting that as Western hardware, old technology, hits the East, and by chance, some of these neighbors had opened them, and they were absolutely amazed. They said, they're the same. It had never occurred to them that a book was something that was the same as another book.
It is inevitable. The eye and the ear just are totally divorced.
Yeah.
And everything you hear is at variance with everything that you see.
Yeah.
Joyce said about then wisdom is born. This is right off, it's a bias of communication.
What about the synchronic and that they made the meaning stuff? Is that me?
Something
Like a nightclub scene.
Yeah, it could be, it could suggest something very dark and glamorous,
Johnny Cage's remark.
No, he's sure that it's tied to something in the native society. Every single thing in the society is related. Every plant. It's the incapacity of the visual man.
Yeah, certainly could suggest a very...
Nightclub scene.
Yeah, it could be a nightclub somewhere.
Yeah.
Joyce said about Finnegan's Wake, what the reader sees and what the reader hears, two totally different things.
Johnny,
The mystical body itself.
Johnny Cage's remark, remember?
They don't know what the hell is going on with the internet. What they're talking about is what Dad was talking about in the 70s.
The Chinese ideogram is a wonderful instrument of unified sensations.
Civilization, the idea of the citizen that grew out of that world, finished right now.
It is so richly unified that most people in our 20th century have begun to study it very carefully as a corrective to our highly specialized alphabet.
And the visual space is the space in which the eye operates, where no two things can be in the same place at the same time.
And this is one of the strange results of electronic circuitry.
well, there's no police like Holmes. It is a very profound sociological treatise. It would take volumes to elucidate it. But Joyce is an example of the return of the oral tradition. And it was from Ireland. And as most of the poetry of our time comes from oral countries.
Own us you will. Biased communication. Harold Innes has something on paper. And paper roots.
After
Harold Innes' work some 25 years ago at the University of Toronto.
Oral tradition emphasized memory and training. We have no history of conversation or of the oral tradition except as they are revealed darkly through the written or the printed word. The drama reflected the power of the oral tradition, but its flowering for only a short period in Greece and in England and illustrates its difficulties. The oral tradition soon phased itself out. Minerva's owl is the opening essay, and that, means it's Hegel's phrase that the owl of Minerva takes its flight at twilight.
Oh, yeah.
When things are just about over, then wisdom is born. And so, this is right off, it's a bias of communication.
It's like the fish in the water. We don't know who discovered water, but we know it wasn't a fish. A pervasive medium, a pervasive environment is always beyond perception.
It's the incapacity of the visual man to relate to an acoustic world. The privileges I made for myself.
For making all that pollution for.
Mutually irritate one another until they suddenly get a flash inside.
You begin to take it as a gestalt.
That's why Deborah always says that in certain circles, glorious reputation.
Out of stone writing, and you get an army or military structure out of paper, because they can carry the orders anywhere.
That the darkness inside the pyramid was to space what silence was to sound, and was not an enclosure at all. However, Carl Williams at that moment said, well, no, that would be into like acoustic space. I'd never heard the phrase or word in my life, acoustic space, in the millennium life. And I have never ceased to meditate on that word, problem, acoustic space. Acoustic space is the space without tactile touch, the intervals, the word of the interval, no connections. So that was a very great moment, the discovery of acoustic space, as opposed to other forms of space.
A courier system. Yeah. So the Roman thing came out of, the Babylonian priesthoods came out of stone writing, and the Roman thing came out of paper.
You have completely misconstrued everything I've said.
You know nothing of my work. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong.
I never heard the phrase or word in my life, acoustic space, in the millennium life.
This was the Broadway campus of the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. Today, no one of the citizens is aware that this is the origin of the Winnipeg School of Communication.
University of Manitoba?
Yeah.
Okay. And we're in front of
the Marshall McLuhan Hall.
Okay. And it happens to be 204, which incidentally is the area code for Winnipeg, but that's just an aside. Okay. Now.
Even not my test.
Okay. Well, you're not alone on that.
Doesn't necessarily mean harmony and peace and quiet, but it does mean huge involvement.
I have never ceased to meditate.
Read and find that it means to guess.
I couldn't bear
multi-locational art. That's fascinating.
Now that gimmick of putting down the highbrow, debunking the pretentious, comes right along through European tradition, out of the Orient, out of Hellenic times, and finally gets to forms we are familiar with: Don Quixote, Rabelais, Sterne's Tristram Shandy. These are direct descendants of the old carnivalistic debunking of the institutions of society.
Kelvin is a high school in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in Canada, North America, Western Hemisphere.
That was not enclosure at all. However, I have never ceased to meditate on that word of problem. And Jack Monteiro was describing Gideon's new book, which was the book that came out on Gideon's documentary. She had been working with him on it steadily. She mentioned in passing that he had said that the Egyptians had not enclosed space, nor had the Greeks. And enclosed space was something first done by the Romans. have nemesis. Brought in the wife of a Greek gent. Not only as Miss Taylor was one person who worked with him a great while. She was one of the founding members of Jack Turk. Department of Architecture.
A sculptural approach to the page.
We're going.
Thought of Marshall McLuhan as the person who most defined the culture that we were moving into. Though it seems that many people are talking about it, that he alone had some insights to it long ago before it was ever very real.
Therapy of the word concerns the work of the witch doctors and the shamans who did the spell, cast the spells and so on, help people to get well. And the spells were cast in various art forms, lyric, epic, dramatic, odes, and so on, were all part of the shaman's equipment. The genre of what we call the genre of literature began in the spells cast by witch doctors and the shamans.
I would like his type of style.
With three guys from Winnipeg.
And then I think Marshall was getting together a little group. Carl William and Tom Easterbrook. This was the group. We got a grant from the Ford Foundation. Comments at bottom from American sources. Marshall was getting together a little group. Carl Williams and Ted Carpenter, of course, were the main ones.
Three guys from Winnipeg. These are all buddies. That's right, but not just.
The exploration school, then, now, and next.
Man broken up into little bits.
I think, Sebastian. Therefore I am.
When we did the screen test, we had set dressing, there was rain machines, there was
whatever. If you've ever heard of it. Minerva's owl is wisdom only comes out in the dark when everything is done.
So at least there's one thing of Hegel that you'll accept. I think that's who I am. I think that's who I am.
Yeah, well, it isn't. You know that cogito really means the experience of thinking.
Yeah.
It's not what I think.
No, I know. I think.
But it's the feeling that you are thinking that makes you feel I am.
Massage.
And the cogito
you call message.
I've always been puzzled to know why is this so subjective, because thinking, after all, is very objective. Friend Noam Chomsky, the linguist, is of the opinion that language exists as a form of brain print. The point is, the Western man thinks that the real changes take place up here in his noodle, and the environment has nothing to do with it. Now, this is Cartesian, a sort of idea of subjectivity. You have a more intensive feeling of thinking when you doubt something than when you already agree with it, you see. And so doubting is a way of having an even more subjective experience. Chomsky, the linguist, of the opinion that language exists as a form of brain print. Everybody has language innate in him. Otherwise, we'd never learn to talk. But he is totally a visual man who doesn't know that the resonant interval is a very, very quick way of learning.
Hegel have had such a profound influence on the European mind that if you don't start with them, you never get on into the other thing. I find Kant and Hegel painful and barren and sterile. Non-stop verbal monsters. The absolute verbal diarrhea of those people has covered Europe a mile deep with ordure. I think it's an absolute disaster for Europe, those people. And we're very lucky the pragmatism of the English tradition would have nothing to do with Kant and Hegel.
For example, a small child learns by hearing his tongue, not by looking at the language. And having heard a few scraps of English repeated in different situations around the home or around the community, he fills in the rest of the gaps resonantly very quickly.
That's very good, actually.
Well, it's also...
I mean, it's interesting to me that he was going to write I doubt, therefore I am.
Oh yeah, that was his, well, you see, this doubt was in the center of his philosophy, the cognition doubt.
Absolutely. I mean, that's also the key to his knowledge.
Now this, by the way, this Western view that man's behavior is independent of his environment is, again, visual. And only a highly visual and highly literate man could ever have such a thought. In other words, it began with the Greeks, but is now ended. We now understand environmentalism as being control of us as well. If Hegelians were a little more intelligent, I might accept even more. But I'm an investigator.
Winnipigeon's wake, pop culture and high culture. Winnipigeon's wake, pop culture and high culture. Winnipigeon's wake.
When you say ABCD, abacus is phoneme. ABCD is morpheme. Has meaning. The ABCs, he knows his ABCs is a meaningful statement. See, they were phonemes.
Pop culture and high culture.
This reminds me of the scene in Annie Hall.
When you use phonemes,
reading and
translate the acoustic into the visual.
And you have to...
When you're dealing with signs that are meaningless, you can take anything from any sphere and translate it into that meaningless, neutral category.
Completely misconstrued everything I've said.
This is not true of any other alphabet. You cannot translate anything into Chinese.
And I agree with, if I had said that, I would agree with you.
Always has, always will. That's the meaning of the word.
The phonetic alphabet that permits
age is
translation of everything into itself. That is why then you turn that outward and you get the visual society is totally aggressive.
When you put
politically aggressive and says all of you people have got to become like us. This is the only culture in the history of the world that ever tried to change everybody into itself.
When you put new clothing around...
And it's called civilization. But the abacus is not.
Clothing around anybody...
When the separation of meaning from the visual came into play, it split Western man wide open. For the first time in history, the visual part of man came alive in isolation from the rest of man. But it was really phonetically in which you were able to put into these meaningless forms the oral tradition. Homer could then be put down visually after centuries of being sung.
I test, I explore to be different.
Yeah.
Instead of explaining, I explore.
Casting his perils before swings.
You know,